Well, tonight we have Karl Hellmann. Karl is has been a stamp collector for many years. He's was involved as an antiques and collectible reseller since the 80s, postcard dealer and ephemera dealer also since the 80s. Been to thousands of flea markets as a dealer. He used to live in Pennsylvania, where he was a professional licensed auctioneer, and he's in Arkansas now, and he's going to talk to us about, well, his eBay seller name is Karl with a K Lectables, KarlLectibbles. You want to look him up. And he's going to talk tonight about the Japanese attack of San Francisco in 1941 and other World War II postcards. So Karl, take it away.
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you. I recognize some names and some faces. I had the privilege for the first time of going to the Wichita Postcard Club show last October and had a wonderful time. Number one, meeting up with Hal for the first time in many years and seeing my dear friends, the Fights and Dolores Rowe. A little bit about myself. I've been a stamp collector since 1962 when a gentleman gave me a box of stamps. I just always loved it. I loved history and have learned a lot from stamps. In 1965, we went on vacation to Lake George, and while I was in a store, I was able to look at a postcard rack for the first time in my memory, and just fell in love with postcards. In 1983, I started out selling at flea markets, and since 1983, I've done approximately 2,500 flea markets, and mainly up in Pennsylvania, and sometimes all year round for a number of years. I've been selling on eBay since 1997 under the name Karl Lectables. I am involved with a lot of collector communities, a licensed auctioneer in Pennsylvania, and have set up at a number of postcard shows and ephemera shows, including the Morlaton show down in Lancaster, the Lancaster County, Allentown, and Singerly Fire Company. So I enjoy shows. Unfortunately, for health reasons, in 2016, I had to make some life decisions and move to Northwest Arkansas to be with a son, so my wife would have someone in case something happened to me. But there's not much going on around here. But while I was in Wichita, I bought a number of boxes of postcards. And one day I was going through the lot and came across this postcard of the Hotel Whitcomb in San Francisco, and that hotel is still there today. I didn't think much of the card. It was thrown in a dealer's quarter box, and so I just looked at it. But because I collect both sides of the card, I always look at the back of a card. And when I did, I noticed that it was a Proxy Stamp, the 1-cent Proxy, and it had a slogan, cancel, buy defense savings bonds and stamps. But then something caught my eye. That was this, the date, December 9th, 1941. And I immediately said to myself, wow, that's pretty close to Pearl Harbor. I wonder if the person mentions anything about the Japanese attack. And so it's from a lady named Pauline, and she says, I'm staying here, so I hope I'm okay. We arrived in Frisco in the midst of a blackout. The Japs were over here last night, and I'm leaving PDQ for home. Love, Pauline, and is sent to her family in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Well, right away, I started saying, what do you mean the Japanese attack on San Francisco? I started doing a little bit of research on it. And this paper here, the Times Union in San Francisco, is from the 9th of December. So basically, she wrote this card the day before and had it the night before, and then mailed it on the 9th. And that article here says there were a number of alarms that went off all during the night. And it was really, people were very afraid. They were afraid of enemy planes, surface vessels, submarines, and they were convinced that the Japanese were going to attack that night. The funny thing about it was when Admiral Yamamoto did not do the third wave of planes, he said, it's time to return and get out of here. So they were actually going the opposite direction from the mainland. But there were weeks and even months that the Japanese was a threat to the Western coast, just as the German U-boats were a threat to the East Coast. My father lived on a small North Shore town in Long Island called Sound Beach, and he remembers very well the Army post and the Coast Guard post along his beach, waiting for U-boats. And there was actually a house in his town that U-boats were letting people off and hiding them. And the FBI actually came to that town looking for this house and for these people. I always like to say, one thing I really encourage people to do is a lot of times you see questions in these postcard chat rooms and they say, well, do I collect the back of the card if it has writing on it? I don't know about you, but I love to see writing on the back of it, especially if it pertains to a real photo postcard to help with the location identification. And also I just like reading other people's mail. I don't know about you, but there's just something interesting about it. Now, although not as popular as letters and Vmail, postcards are used by service members and the folks back home during World War II. The one thing about postcards versus a letter, there's always a picture, a scene to ponder, and then a short message. The Vmail was this, and I'm going to show you an example. This was the Vmail letter that you wrote on. You wrote your letter in this spot over here. And the reason for Vmail was because of the millions, the literal millions of letters that were being ferried back and across, especially by boat, took up so much room that they had to find a way. And it's a very interesting video to watch on YouTube about Vmail. And I encourage you to watch it if you have any interest in this period mail. And here's some examples of Vmail. And we're not going to spend much time, but you see right here, the person's address here, who wrote it, and then the APO, which is an Army post office. If you ever see an FPO, that's a Fleet post office. And this is a letter written from home. I am very happy to say that I own 2 very personal emails that were written to my father by my great uncle Tor, who was a Swedish immigrant in the 20s. And because of his age, when he was drafted, he did not go to the front, but he landed on Normandy Beach on December 7th as part of a Army hospital, and wrote my father. Some of the neatest collectibles are the Vmails that are done with various art. This one's a printed art, but I've actually seen where the soldier or the sailor or the Marine or Coast Guard man literally did his own artwork, and they're fascinating. Probably one of the most popular postcards of World War II are the comics, always making fun of Army life or Navy life. Usually the sergeant was the brunt of jokes, or a superior officer. Usually it had something to do with, in this case, wash day, KP duty, guard duty, various things of mundane life in the service. Here's another one here where they use the animal. This is a crop postcard from Milwaukee. Propaganda postcards were very popular. Here's a good example of one where a whack is hitting Adolf Hitler. I'm going to show you some other propaganda postcards here. Here's one: we're going to bury Hitler face down. Then if he should come to life and starts to dig, he will dig his way into hell. As you notice, the flower birth on top is some cabbage, carrots, and beets. I've seen some pretty derogatory Axis-related postcards. They were not loved. And especially for some reason, they really picture the Japanese in a very bad way. Here's the three axes: Mussolini, Hitler, and Tojo. And one thing you always notice about the Japanese postcards of this time of Army is the enhancing of the squinted eyes, the buck teeth, and of course, a lot of these postcards probably wouldn't be printed today about our enemies. But then again, the way they fought this war, it was win or here were the leaders of the world. So they had to do everything to get it done. Another type of postcard you'll find is various service branches and service divisions. In this case, the Seabees, that were the construction battalions of the US Navy. This is a very famous one. I don't have an example of it, but there's a lot of Walt Disney produced mascots, and I am not sure if this is a Disney produced artwork or not. But that's another fascinating topic, what Walt Disney Studios did for the war effort with art. Here's a real photo of a I think it's a 105 Howitzer, and there's a lot of postcards of weapons, tanks, planes, ships, infantry, Marines. Here's one of a plane flying from Maxwell Field, which is no longer an Army base, but is, and this was the Army Air Force. Before the Air Force, you see right up here, it says AAF, Army Air Force. A lot of these fields became airports. Lowry Field in Denver became Stapleton Airport. You brought you. I'm sure many of you know different ones. I would say one of the neatest World War II postcards that I ever had or attempted to sell was one of 4 planes flying over the Grand Canyon from Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. It was written by a pilot, written home. I put it up on eBay. This was probably about at least 15 years ago. And I got an email the second day it was up from a guy in the Netherlands. And he said, sir, he said, is there any way that you could sell me that postcard? I had it up for auction. He said, my buddies and I every year do reenactments in Belgium. And we go to this cemetery there, and that airman is buried in that cemetery. In fact, I found a picture of his tombstone in the cemetery and put it in the auction. And he said that each of the 4 guys that he goes with, they adopted 5 tombstones, which they clean every year and spruce them up. And that he'd been in the contact with the family. You hear all kinds of, if any of you sell on eBay, you know that sometimes people like to tell you stories to get things, but this story was just too much. You couldn't make it up. And I took the thing off, I sent it to him, and he wrote me back a very, very nice letter about it. So yeah, these Army Air Force ones and the bombers have unbelievable stories. My father-in-law was a fireman in England at an airfield, and he said so many of them came shot up with so many holes. He pulled countless dead pilots and crew members out of these planes. And truly, we need to be thankful for the sacrifices that men and women did on our behalf. Here's another one. Here's a Kurt Tyke of the P38 Lightning Interceptor, one of the most popular planes in World War II. And an interesting thing about it is if you had to abandon the plane, you had to turn it literally upside down, because if you jumped out, you were caught by the crosstail, either your parachute or you were destroyed. One of the most interesting types of postcards that are out there are matchbook cover postcards. I'll tell you what, one day I was at a flea market back in Pennsylvania in Lancaster County, got there at 5:30 in the morning, started setting up, and the weather was kind of iffy. And around 9 o'clock, it started to rain. And I said, oh man, what a disaster. Little did I know that God did me a big favor that day, because right across the street from the flea market was an auction, the Conestoga Auction Gallery. And that day they were selling 1 million match covers from a collector. I don't know his name, but it was a massive collection. And one of the lots had 473 different matchbook postcards. Hal mentioned Dolores Rowe, her late husband, Leon. When I showed him them at a show, he said, wow, unbelievable. Now, he said something very interesting. If you notice, there's a stamp box in the upper right-hand corner where the address would go. here and any information would go there. He said he's never seen a used one, a postally used one. Has anyone here ever seen one?
I've never even seen one at all. I mean, this is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Carl,
never knew.
Carl, what was the hole for? The
The hole,
perforation?
the hole, the hole was to pull the paper through the printing press. In other words, these were all printed on a sheet, so there were a number of holes, and you'll see that on matchbook covers. They need a way to pull the sheets that were probably, I don't know, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet, and that's how they were printed. And they
Did they have
needed
matches in them at
that-
one time?
What's that?
Did they actually have matches in them at one time?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And when I have access to the camera again, I'm going to show you one that I have in my hand with matches in. But yes, they had matches in them at one time, and like I said, never saw one. Leon, who collected them, never saw one postally used, and that's one of the things on my bucket list that I would love to find one that was postally used. But they had, out of the 473 that I got that day, the glider ones went for obscene amounts of money, $60 to $80 a piece. And a lot of them had the gliders that they used, especially to get the Pathfinders into Europe for the Normandy invasion on the night of June 5th into the early morning hours of June 6th. And these men were dropped off in gliders, and a number of them, of course, parachuted. But these gliders were, once they left the tow rope, it was quite a trip. Walter Cronkite, I heard him talking about it one day, a trip that he took, and he said it was controlled chaos. And he said, once is enough. Once is enough. Some other World War II postcards that I really didn't really have time to do a great amount of work, but home front. You see so many postcards of factories, of factory workers, of course, the iconic Rosie the Riveter. And it's just fascinating what's out there. One of the books, and I'm going to get off this PowerPoint presentation now. So here's an example of a matchbook postcard. This is from the U.S. Naval Air Station at Corpus Christi, Texas. It has a fighter on it. You open it up, it has matches in. And if you look here in the corner, there's the stamp box. You don't find them very often. So it's something that you might want to keep your eye open for. One of the things I did not have time to really get into for lack of time was the back of postcards. Here's a good example of, if you notice, there's no stamp on it. It says free. Service people during wartime could use free franking. And this particular one is just a postcard of a building in Dallas. And it is from the San Marcos, Texas, the Army Air Force Navigation School in that town. And it was written by an airman back home to his family. Here's another one right here from Algeria. And this one is censored. And the funny thing about it, because the guy was a captain, he could censor his own mail. If you're interested in books to find out more about Army post offices, Richard Hellbach, the author of the series of U.S. Post Office, has done a wonderful work of the Army post offices. You're able to go in, you're able to see the dates that a unit was there, where they were, and it's very helpful into doing research if you enjoy postal history also.
Back to that last card, how do you censor a postcard? Since it's,
Well,
what does that mean? Because it's, oh, I mean, you mean what didn't get
in
mailed?
other words, before it was mailed, a senior officer had to read the letter, or a censor would have to read the letter or the postcard, and they would take a pen. If there was any information in there that could be used by the enemy, they would cross it out. Or I have had pages literally where there's big cutouts of information. So a person couldn't say, I am 15 miles from Paris. What they could say is somewhere in France. So a censor would have to read that for information that could be used by the enemy. If you remember the slogan, loose lips sink ships, that's what a censor would do.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll just open it up to anyone that might have questions. I am not the tell-all authority on this. It's just something I enjoy. But if I can be of any assistance, let me know. Okay, well, I see that Hal has 2 postally used postcards. Hal, would you please take a photo and
I'll be glad to share them with you later. I think I know where one is, and I have to look for the other one. But mine, I've always looked for one. What I'm looking for is one that was sent free, like the free franking. And to do that, you were supposed to write free in the stamp box, but also include your name and address. And that's the kind of postcard on the back of a match cover that I'm looking for. Now, the 2 that I have stamps. They have a penny stamp, and they're postally used, and it's during the war. So that's pretty good. But yeah. I know there was one of them that says, like, here, Bobby's one for your collection. So somebody, you know, Bobby was home there and uncle was off to war, or dad was, or brother. And so they sent him one, but I'm still looking for, you know, that's the chase. That's the fun of collecting, is looking for something you don't have. And what I don't have is one that has free franked and is sent from the field or from a camp or a post, and used that way. So I think they're great and very cool, and it's not for everybody. They don't, they're the perfect size that will go in a postcard sleeve, and then they will go in an album. So that has something to do that's good about them. But I just think they're wonderful, and I collect them, but kind of by states, and look for the ones from Kansas or Oklahoma, because there were so many little fields for training here in the Kansas and in Oklahoma say it was pretty flat. That was good for flying an airplane or learning how to fly one. And so there were a lot of small little bases that they used for flight training. And some of them, most of them didn't, well, some of the larger ones had some postcards, that's true. And then some of them had generic postcards, the very same front that you'll see for 20 different or more different camps, but they'll have their name printed across there. Like there's a Army Airfield in Victoria, Kansas. That's northwestern Kansas, out in the middle of a wheat field, almost literally. And so that's the only postcard I have for Victoria. I think I'm still looking for a match cover from there, but you know, that's the great fun of collecting, and it would be wonderful to get to know other collectors that are looking for it and have been working on them for a while and see what they have that you don't have, and that's a big part of it too.
Yeah,
But what you've shown tonight's been really good and interesting, and a good flavor of what there is out there. It's wonderful, Karl.
there's so much. And my hope now is that when I come to Wichita next year, that I buy the one copy 2 minutes before you show up to the table. That would be worth the whole admission of the show.
Well, it's free admission, by the way, so you don't have to worry about that. But very
Does cost
few.
a drive, though.
That's true. Very few dealers seem to carry those match cover postcards, and that's okay. You just keep looking for them, and you know it's a whole nother field to collect. And
Yeah.
so a military collector can find a match cover collector that maybe has some duplicates or doesn't. Most matchbooks are the standard size, where the military ones are twice that width. So that, you know, that's just some of the differences that we find.
Most matchbooks hold 20 matches. This one here holds 40 matches. So you're
Right.
correct in your statement that they're twice the size. But that's just one of the things. I see Clarissa wrote that in World War I, Italian soldiers were forced to use postcards due to lack of envelopes and stamps. No stamps needed on a military. Yes, and you can also find free franking in most European armed forces, Canadian and US, going back even to World War I.
Yeah, I found, I don't know, some may have seen my talk, you know, for over 400 postcards on two lovers that they exchanged. And one of the guy on the front was saying, "I'm sorry, I cannot write you letters because I cannot find envelope and there is no stamps here.
Yeah,
We write you postcards because they're free."
yep. Also, the craziest things you'll find is that at the canteens that were all over the United States for the servicemen, especially at train depots, would just collect any and all different types of postcards, and servicemen would, I've seen cards written on park scenes that were from 200 miles away from the canteen where it was posted. The other thing is to find military World War II postcards that were ROPs. Railroad post office cancellations is always interesting too, because the servicemen basically traveled by train across the United States.
You know, one of my father's cousin, when he graduated from Annapolis, went to work. He was in combination of the Marines and the State Department. And he was based in Manila, Philippines, at the embassy there. And the State Department sent him to Manchuria. This was in the 30s. To photograph what the Japanese were doing to the Manchurians. And I remember my grandmother showed me the photographs once that he sent her, a couple hundred. And they were absolutely horrible, brutal, horrible photographs. And she explained to me at the time that he had to sneak these out because although he was, I don't know what his rank was, but he had a good rank. He also had to censor himself and he couldn't send this stuff back to the United States because this was still something that was our State Department considered secret, plus, I don't know, for military reasons, whatever. So what he would do is when he'd get back to Manila, he'd have his camera, he'd have his own photographs processed in Manila, turn the rest of the film into the government. And then the only way he'd get the stuff back to the United States was to pack it in preferably souvenir clothing, you know, stuff neither of my grandparents had any interest in. But that was those were the only packages that weren't searched. And especially if they were coming from a person in the military. And so these, I don't know what my grandparents did with them in the end. I probably destroyed them, but even then, before the war, stuff was being censored, and he was breaking the rules, but he thought people in this country should know what was happening, and so they ended up with this large collection of pretty horrible pictures.
Well, I know my daughter-in-law is a Korean. My son lives in Korea now and has for the last 10 years, teaching English as a second language to little kids in their apartment. They have about 40 kids that come every week to learn English. And some of the older people who were children back when the Japanese and they would be very old people now. There was not a great love for the Japanese, what they did in Korea, China, and a lot of the islands around there. The younger people, they don't remember the history, so they have let it go. But yeah, I can only imagine. I have had postcards from POWs written, and that's another interesting thing to look at. Any other questions, comments?
Well, thank you very much, Carl. You may have a question, Phil?
Yeah, just that obviously there's just World War II was really big, involving the war, you know, the whole world, and so many different aspects of postcards. And we appreciate the many different aspects that you covered in your talk.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
At the beginning, you mentioned something about two friends that sell $8 million a year on eBay. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What do they sell? That's a lot of sales.
Basically, they sell clothing, used clothing. But in this resellers group, there are people that sell clothing, toys, everything sellers, electronics, cars, a little bit of everything. And the group is $1 a day, but I'll tell you the access to 2,300 people that are sellers, it's an unbelievable knowledge that is traded on a daily basis. There's probably about 17 different programs every week on different subjects, and it's called the Reseller Nirvana group. And it's run by a guy named Tech and Sports and also Chris Lynn of Daily Refinement. So if you want to learn more about selling, it's a great group. It's just a great group to learn from.
Do you know Mark Jones in Illinois that does the videos weekly about selling postcards?
Yes, I know who you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He spoke to our club once a while ago.
I'm right now. My son gifted me a very powerful computer that I'm going to start working on a YouTube channel and see what we can do from there. But it's a lot of work. I just need to just concentrate on just selling instead of yapping. But I saw your plea on Facebook for someone to speak, and I said, why not? What's the worst I
Thank you
could
very much.
do?
You're the only one that replied to that. So thank you. We're glad that you did.
Well,
Do you
thank you,
specialize
Michael.
in any certain types of postcards that you sell more of than others?
You know, I have sold tens of thousands of postcards on eBay. I just like any, you go through a box and you just say, that's a good one, that's a good one, that's a good one. I mean, people sell boxes of postcards. Usually they don't look at the back. I do a lot of postal history, a lot of don't cancels, a lot of Proxy series stamps from the presidential series from the late 30s, that type of postal history. So anything and everything. Good real photos. So you never know.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everybody, for coming.